Good afternoon, Greg.
Good afternoon, Joe.
Greg, you're a Vietnam War veteran. You was in infantry, right?
I was.
Eh, So tell me a little bit about this new book that you just literally got done publishing.
Well, Joe, as a young man, I grew up in Ashland, graduated from Ashland High School, Ashland College, and I lost my draft deferment, and I was drafted. And in the course of being drafted, I went through all the training, was sent to Vietnam, and I served with the 3rd Battalion, 39th Infantry, in the 9th Infantry Division. Went over there by ship, and we ended up disembarking on January 1st, 1967. And from there, we were taken to Camp Bearcat, ultimately to Rock Keene in the Mekong Delta in the South Vietnam. And our unit was one of the first combat units that was trained in the United States to serve in the Mekong Delta to try to rid the Viet Cong in that part of the world. So what prompted the book? I was involved in a number of events in Vietnam. I, like a lot of veterans, when we came home, it was an ugly mood in this country, at least when I came home late in 1967. There were war demonstrations all over the country. There was an anti-Vietnam war. There was an anti-Vietnam veteran sentiment. And so a lot of us shut down, and we didn't talk about even being in the Vietnam War at all. I was able to, for the most part, to get on with my life, went back to school, got an education, raised a family. But I hit some speed bumps along the way. And part of those speed bumps created some challenges in my own personal world. So what's the book about? The book is about life, death, heartache, mistakes, divorce. But it's also about healing and redemption and forgiveness, which sometimes is a hard thing to do when you're faced with some of the challenges that I was faced with in my unit. I lost men in my platoon. When I came home, while I did go back to school and get an education, I suppressed even the knowledge that I'd served in Vietnam for many, many years. As time rolled on, I had different experiences that slowly but surely allowed me to talk about having been a veteran. And in the course of that, I have 6 children. 2 of those children and I went back to Vietnam in 1967. And I even had a fellow Vietnam veteran say to me, "Greg, why would anybody want to go back to that hellhole?" And it caused me to pause. And there's 2 reasons. Number one, I wanted to go back to areas, combat areas that had specific importance to me, to honor those that I lost and wounded, and to also see, hopefully, a better country and a better climate and a better people. That was reason number one. Reason number 2 was to share with my boys at that particular point some of the experiences I'd had from almost 50 years ago, but to also generate a better set of memories coming home the second time. Those were the 2 reasons that I went back to Vietnam. When I came back home, I published a journal that I kept by day, by minute, and by hour on that journey back with my 2 boys. That journal is one of the chapters
Show your book there.
in this. And thus the title of the book, Vietnam Survival, both there and home. Because, Joe, there were 2 wars. There was the war in Vietnam, and there was the war for hundreds of thousands of us when we came home. Just under 3 million personnel served within the borders of Vietnam over the 10-year period that the United States was involved in that. And so, as a result of coming home, it was a circumstance where most of us just shut down. We didn't talk about it. You can see on the cover picture here, that happens to be a picture of me at the traveling wall that was in Ashland here at the Veterans Appreciation Day just a few years ago. And my hand is close to men on that wall that never came home. The events that I've just described to you, Joe, are covered in the 30 chapters in this book. And it covers the good, the bad, and the ugly on both a military level, but also on a personal level. It's taken me almost 60 years to get to the point that I could or was willing to talk about it. Now, having said that, I've shared some of what's in this book, slowly but surely along the way, starting maybe 10 years ago. But I hadn't told the whole story until I decided to write the book. Family members wanted me to write this book. There's a community member that asked me about writing the book. And so I've chosen to do that. And at the end of the day, so this book reveals the rest of the story. If you can see clear down right here, what does this say? This says, this is my story. It is not intended to be anyone else's story. This book articulates my own personal experiences during the war with my unit and my own personal experiences and what I was treated to and what I was left to deal with when I came back to the United States. And there were very specific events that are burned in the memory bank that will never leave. So this book chronicles the rest of the story. So what's the purpose of doing all this? Again, it's about life, death, heartache, but it's also a book about faith, forgiveness, hope, and healing. So I would submit that anybody who reads this, it's my hope, if you experience the trauma of war, rape, physical abuse, assault of any kind, if you choose to take the book and read the whole book, then just maybe for those of you that have experienced these kind of horrific events in your own life, maybe this will provide you some measure of hope, faith, forgiveness, and healing in your own life. Finally, I'm in my 80th year. If I was ever going to tell the story, it had to be now, or it was never going to take place. So it's not just a legacy for my wife and my children, and even for my first wife, because we did not survive, and part of that's on me. At the end of the day, the hope is that this will do some good for both veterans and non-veterans alike.
Speaking of the book, Greg, can you tell me like one of the chapters or one of the stories that you're talking about that was probably the hardest to write about?
That's a tough question. One of the 30 chapters that was toughest to write about. Two. One of the chapters deals with the fact that I did not talk about the war even to my first wife. I shared some of it, but not all of it. And I talk about this in the book as I look back. I regret that I didn't. Would it have made a difference? Maybe. Maybe not. But that was hard to write about because it's very, very personal. There's another chapter in the book that was hard to write about. In fact, there's two of them that chronicle this, and that is when I came home to the United States, they were burning the American flag and the draft card at Travis Air Force Base in Southern California. That was my welcome home. And then, when I get back to Ashland, I was invited to speak to a small group of people. And the invitation came from a man who had written me as a community service project for his organization. And he was a wonderful man. Very supportive, very uplifting. But when I came home, and keep in mind I was raw and I was rough around the edges, in light of some experiences that happened in Vietnam, plus Travis, plus similar things in Cleveland, he asked me if I would come and speak to this group. And my reaction to that was, my thought was, no, I don't want to do this. And I even expressed it a little stronger than that. But out of respect for him, I did it because he had sustained me and supported me. I went to speak to his group, small group, and they had been monitoring the war, and they wanted to talk to somebody who had actually just come home from the war in a combat environment. And the Mekong Delta was every bit of that, and then some. And so I did. And I got about halfway, maybe more than halfway through that discussion with this small group, and one of them raised their hand, and he identified himself as a military officer, former military officer, which I took to mean, given his age, keep in mind, I was 22 years old. They were all in their 40s, 50s, or maybe 60s. And he basically said to me, and this is a paraphrase, "What's wrong with you guys? Why aren't you winning this thing?" And I froze. And I looked at the man that had written me faithfully. And I looked at him and I thanked him for supporting me. And then I looked back at the group and basically said words to this effect: you either didn't hear what I just told you, you didn't understand what I just told you. Did you not understand it was about search and destroy? It was about booby traps. It was about claymore mines. It was about punjae sticks. It was about all this hit and run type of combat, unlike any other war that this country has ever been in, at least up to that point in time. And with that, I shut it down. That was the final straw. Did you not hear what I just told you? And I shut it down. And I thanked him for what he had done for me, and I walked out of that room. And when I went home, I took all of my military stuff that I brought home from Vietnam, except for one jacket and one little cardboard box that has memorabilia and commendations in it, and I threw all the rest of it away, thinking if I threw all that stuff away, that would put the war behind me. The reality is that was just the beginning of years of suppression and shutting her down. Those two circumstances and those two events were pretty tough to write about. But to be honest with you, Joe, there are other chapters in the book that were also tough to write about. But I wrote the book in the hopes it just might help other Vietnam veterans who maybe have never talked to their wives, only partially talked to their wives, or never talked to their other loved ones. And near the end of the book, one of the chapters says, "It's taken me to the age of 80 to get to the point I could do this." And the hope is that other Vietnam veterans, or anybody that's experienced the trauma of war, rape, abuse, or the other things I've shared with you, may you muster the courage to share your story with those that you love while you still can, because they want to know. And if they don't want to know, don't worry about what they might think. I worried about that for decades. And so hopefully the book will be a vehicle for wives and for widows to maybe find a measure of peace and healing in their own world and in their own life. And if one person benefits from it, and I can tell you, I've had one person that called me after the Kim Phuc dinner, at the Vietnam Veterans Annual Dinner, a lifelong friend. Her husband was a Vietnam veteran. He died last year. I gave her a copy of the book. I've known her for decades. She contacted me after she read this because her husband had never talked to her about it. We'd had all kinds of challenges in his life. I knew him, I knew her. And she said, when I read this, it didn't change what happened between them as a husband and wife, but it helped her understand a little bit more about why he was wired and how he was wired the way he was after she read the book.
Now, another thing I want to touch on is where is the book available, and also do you have it? Is it in audio format or just paperback?
Well, as I say to a number of people, Joe, I am not a technology-oriented person. So this book currently, and I emphasize currently, is published the old-fashioned way. This is it. There's the front, and there's the back. Mekong Delta Search and Destroy, and the front with me at the wall. This is the only format the book is in at this point. Now, it was just published recently. And so there'll be book signing events that will be taking place here shortly in Ashland. I have no idea how that's going to work or how that's going to unfold, but right now it's in this form. Now, if it turns out that this is something that really will be helpful to many other people, then I'll cross that bridge
When you get there?
when we get there and determine if I want to approach finding a way to get it on an audiobook or any kind of social media platform or Amazon. But I can tell you this, Joe, I won't be the one doing it. Somebody will have to assist in that.
So the only available way to get a copy of the book is through you right now?
Is through me, or look for the various media outlets, yourself included, for upcoming book signing events. I can tell you there is one that is firm, and that firm book signing event is coming up here at this organization at the Hot Shots Tactical Shooting Center, and that date is coming up here on May the 3rd, and it will be from 10 to 2. I've been asked if I would speak a few minutes at the 10 o'clock opening, take a little break a couple hours down the road, and then speak again for those who may come in the afternoon at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And so book signings, purchase of the book, the cost of the book is $20. And I will say this about the cost. The $20 goes for two purposes, not three. These are the two purposes. Purpose number one is to help just defray the publishing and printing cost of the book. Anything above and beyond book sales then goes to the Ashland chapter of the American Vietnam Veterans Events, Inc. It's a local organization that helps support the Veterans Appreciation Day events and helps support the annual Vietnam Veterans Era Dinner. And the third thing it doesn't go to, not a penny of this goes to the author. None of it comes to me. The purpose of the book is not to make money. The purpose of the book is to help people find a way to heal from the various events I've just previously described. And if more of these books sell than what my production cost is, then that money's going to go to the organization I just talked about. Joe, I've been asked the question now that more and more people are learning that I've published the book. I was asked a couple of questions. One of the questions was, how long did it take you to write the book? Two answers to that question. I had to develop the chapter headings and the chapter titles before I could write the book. And so I, with the exception of the first chapter, which will become obvious when you read it, the entire book is sequential, before, during, and after the war. And so the 29 chapters after chapter 1 are sequential. I was able to formulate those chapter titles within less than a month. Why was I able to do that? Because it's my story, and I lived it, and I understand it. And part of helping me remember that was the trip back to Vietnam in 2016, where I kept that journal that I published to my family that I told you about earlier. And second of all, it had to do with the fact that not only did I live it, but from time to time over the years, even though much of it was suppressed, it would come back to me. It would pop up with a sound, a noise, a smell. And with respect to how long did it take me then to finish writing the book, once I had the 30 chapters identified, I knew what the topic was. It was just a matter of going back in and writing the story, chapter by chapter by chapter. So from the time I generated the chapter titles until it went, quote, to several iterations of proofreading, It was probably less than 6 months.
Now, did you find when you were starting writing the book and you got the titles down and the chapters down, remembering some of the events that happened, did you find that you remembered events once you started to really think about it that you hadn't initially thought of
Correct.
that would be in the book?
Correct. And were there nights when I was up at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning when the thoughts came to me that I hadn't pondered for years? The answer is yes. And did I get up at 3 o'clock and 4 o'clock in the morning and go work on this? Yes. Because if I didn't, because for years I had suppressed a number of events and issues, it might not have come back to me as clearly as it did at that particular 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning time frame. And so I went and recorded it. And to be honest with you, on more than one occasion, you know, my wife, Gail, and she and I have been together for 43 years, my current wife, she would come into the den sometimes. She recognized I was up, and she would come in and saying, "You need to put this away. You need to come back to bed. You need to shut this down. Come back to it tomorrow. Make your notes. Because if you keep doing this, you're gonna be sick. You're not gonna get the rest you need, the sleep that you need." And I found myself saying, if I don't do it right now, I may lose it again. Because I had tried to lose it along the way for decades. So it wasn't just about writing the book and generating the chapter titles. It was about, you had to bring it all back in order for you able to write the book in the first place. And that part, on more than one occasion, was challenging. The question that you haven't asked, and I'll ask the question and then I'll answer it, is, am I glad at this point that I have written the book? The answer is yes, if it will help my family and if it will help others along the way who maybe have experienced some of the same bumps in the road that I experienced before, during, and after the war. But we're dying at the rate of 400 a day, Joe. The stories need to be told, if for no other reason, for families and for wives whose husbands have not been able to talk to them about it. I've spoken to a couple of different schools over the years. One of them I remember distinctly. It was Mapleton. And I was invited to come up there. It was either for Veterans Day or Memorial Day service. And this was after I'd been to Vietnam. And I came back and my boys had taken all these pictures and they put it in a PowerPoint. So I went and shared portions of that PowerPoint with that student body. And I talked a little bit about Vietnam. I didn't get deep in the weeds because I'm talking to high school kids at this point. But at the end of the day, I had 2 young girls and 2 young boys come up to me after I was done and said, "My grandpa served in Vietnam. And we've never really heard much about it." And this one young lady, she was pretty tearful about it because her grandpa had had some challenges along the way. So part of the value, hopefully, is have Vietnam veterans find some peace and closure, and where they can, if they can, share their story. Now, I've had a couple of vets say to me, "Well, I don't have a story to tell. I was not in Vietnam." Here's what I would say to them. There were those of us in combat. There were those of us that were supported, not in a combat zone, but supported with things that we needed. Those who are back in this country were supporting in many different ways. And when we came home, there was a lot of support from the healthcare professionals. Anybody who served in the military during the Vietnam era, they have a story that they can tell, and I would hope that they would. Especially the mood of this country when we came home. There's 2 or 3 chapters that get in the weeds on that, Joe. I'll let you read that part.
So writing this book, was it? Did you find that it brought closure to a lot of healing, a lot of closure, and the book, or was you already at that point and decided to write a book?
There is never 100% closure, and I'll answer your question with this. A fellow Vietnam vet was asked this question by a non-vet. When did the war end for you? And the response to my Vietnam veteran friend was, it never ends. And what he meant by that was, yes, you can find some peace. Yes, you can find some closure. Yes, you can get on with life. I mean, I've had a terrific life for the most part, and I've been blessed in many ways. And yes, has this brought in an additional measure of closure, an additional level of peace? The answer is yes, but when you get to the reflections chapter in this book, which is the last chapter, you never forget the experiences both in Vietnam, and I'm speaking for me again, not for other veterans. You never forget some very specific events that happened there, which are in the book, in those 30 chapters, as well as specific events that happened when I came home. You never forget those. You just put them where they don't hurt you as much as they used to. I had an experience where I thought I was dealing with a villager that was friendly. He gave me a shave. I needed to shave every now and then. And I was trying to help him out by giving him a few piastres. Give me a shave, because occasionally I'd get a shave when I was back in the States, just for the experience of it. In a search and destroy mission not long after that, he was amongst the dead. Friendly by day, Viet Cong by night. Think I ever got a shave over there again? Do you think I dealt with any of the villagers after that? The answer is no. Everybody has their own experience. Joe, another reason why it's critical that not just my story, but the Vietnam veterans that are still on this earth story, to be told, it's been 50 years since the war ended. The Vietnam veterans are dying at the rate of over 400 per day. This pace will only accelerate, and 10 years from now, most of us will be gone. And so, if these stories are not told now or in the very near future, then our history, their history, this country's history, it'll be lost forever. That's why it's important that these get told, not just for our own family's sake, but for our community's sake, for the history of the country. And the younger generation, they need to know about these things. And so when governments decide it's time to go to war, they need to be very careful when they go to war. The slaughter in Vietnam, with 58,000 killed, over 300,000 wounded, hundreds of thousands of both North and South Vietnamese troops killed, and over 2 million civilians slaughtered and killed between North, South Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. And what did we gain from that? Did we slow down the spread of communism? Maybe for a while, but let's be honest here. Today it is not the North Vietnam, it's not South Vietnam, the whole country. It's the Socialist Republic of Vietnam. It's a communist country. So when governments put young men, and I was young, and most of the men and women served in Vietnam, they were young, 19, 20, 20. I was the old man in my unit. I was 21. Most World War II vets were much older than that. And so the reality is, when governments put our troops' lives at risk, they better be sure that they know what they're doing. This was not a declared war. It was called the Vietnam conflict. This was never a declared war by Congress. And so, in it to win it was never certain. And so, we can debate whether or not the government strategy was successful or not. We can debate whether or not the Paris Peace Accord was successful or not. What we can not debate is about the human cost of that war, not just in terms of physical wounds and death, but the emotional toll. And quite frankly, It cost me on a personal level, and it cost me in family relationships for years. I'm one of the lucky ones, though. I was able to come through it, not as soon as I would have hoped. There are hundreds of thousands of other Vietnam veterans are in varying degrees of telling their story or not, and they're in varying degrees of having healed or not. That's why it's not just my story. There are hundreds of thousands of other untold stories, and those need to be told, and people need to find a way to heal.
Can you give me a rundown? How would you best describe what you did over the search and destroy? You got ready and you went out into the
I was involved in a 4.2-inch mortar platoon. In our particular platoon, the way we were organized, and I talked to some other vets where theirs was organized a little different, and Sergeant Joseph Reed Jr. was our sergeant. He was the sergeant in charge of all of us. 4.2-inch mortar is referred to as high-angle hell. You got Willie Peter, which is white phosphorus, and it'll burn right through you. You got illumination rounds, so you can get them up in the air at night to see what's coming if you're thinking you're about to be overrun. That's chapter 1 in the book. Had we been asleep at FDC or at the outpost, if any of us would have been asleep, our whole unit could have been wiped out. That's chapter 1. So you got the mortar, you got the 4.2-inch mortars, you have the ammo bearers, you have the gunners, you have the FDC, the guys that are plotting the calculations. But none of that happens as it relates to high explosive rounds in addition to white phosphorus and illumination rounds, unless you have your platoon or other platoons or other troops in the Delta on a search and destroy mission where the forward observer, they're pinned down, they're under fire, and they need help. And that forward observer calls back to FDC and says, this is the map location, this is the grid, this is the coordinates. Okay, you figure out, okay, what do we have to do to get the right number of charges on the right rounds and have those mortar rounds to go out to try to stop the enemy from overrunning that platoon that's in the field. And if that's not enough, then you call for 155 millimeter howitzer, 105 millimeter howitzer, or if you're really in the thick of it, you're calling for airstrikes. And you let the company commander let him know, this is what's going on, this is what we need, and we need it now. So from my perspective, I was a forward observer, I was FDC calculating to get the stuff out there. I'm an ammo bearer, and I'm a gunner on a 4.2-inch mortar. Search and destroy missions, you're out there with your M16, jumping out of these into the rice paddies, sometimes up to your neck. On one occasion of the book, I described just one event in terms of you coming into a hot LZ, meaning you're under fire before you ever jump off the helicopter. On this one occasion, I jump, we're under fire, I hit the water, I flop down, get behind one of these 6 to 12-inch dikes that go around the rice paddy. The guy above me, he never jumps. He's hit. And I hear him screaming, I'm hit, take me up, take me up. And of course the choppers, they don't put the choppers down. They hover for a few seconds, you jump and they're gone. Never saw him again. I don't know if he lived or died. And so, forward observer, FDC, ammo bearer, and gunner. And that's when you're not on night bunker watch duty with a night scope checking to see if enemies approaching our compound, which happened on the night that's in chapter 1. And so that's what you do for the entire time that you're there, except for when I went on R&R. And I was one of the lucky ones. I got to go see my first wife in Hawaii. Two of us were permitted to go from our whole unit. So we're there for like the 9, 10, or 11 days, or whatever it is. But getting back on that airplane to come back to Vietnam was one tough airplane to get on because I knew what I was going back to. And so I say in the book more than once, there are circumstances where you wonder on this particular night, and there's a chapter that deals with this. There was one night, Joe, when I went back to my cot, my mosquito-covered cot, in a hooch that leaked during monsoon season, which was months after months after months. And you hear combat operations off in the distance, not in your immediate area, but we were all in the Mekong Delta area with our unit. Different battalions, different companies, all part of the 9th. At the end of the day, you could hear those sounds of 105s, 155s, our guys, but you also hear enemy fire. And so the thoughts come more than once. Is this inching closer to where we physically are at night? And I had more than one night, and one of the chapter titles in the book is Tonight the Night? Will I ever see home again? I had a number of experiences like that that are in the book. I'll stop with that.
Okay. Well, Greg, I appreciate your time, and I look forward to reading this book.
Well, thanks for taking the time to talk about it, Joe.